Welcome to the Point Man Podcast. This is a mic'd up men's group of 4 Catholic fathers challenging each other to be the point men for their families.
I am a fighter. I am a fighter.
This podcast, we're going to talk about Frassati. His first name is Giorgio Frassati. Pier Giorgio
Man with 2
Frassati.
first names.
I'm excited for a couple reasons. One is we've talked a little on the darker side of humanity. We've kind of gone through Auschwitz camps. We've gone through some dark things. And Frassati he's very relatable. He's very much just a normal man, and I'm excited to really unpack his story together. Sam, we're going to let you just kind of start off with 1 or 2 highlights of his story, kind of get us kicked off, and then we're just pass the ball around and unpack it.
Yeah, perfect. So I love Blessed Pier Giorgio Frassati for a lot of reasons. In fact, I had came across him when I was in college. There was this little pamphlet in the chapel, and I remember devouring this pamphlet. I was like, "Who is this guy?" he was this young, vibrant youth, and being in my early 20s at the time, it was, to your point, very relatable to read about this saint. And nothing, he's not standing on a pillar with his hands folded, fasting for, days at a time. He's just living a life as a college student, but he's living a sacramental life. And that was the difference. And he had a deep interior life, and he had a life of service, which we can unpack here. But he also was a man of adventure, a man with deep friendships, a man who smiled readily, loved well, served well, and by all accounts was just this normal college student. But it wasn't until after his death that all of these things became revealed to his parents, who were agnostic. So that's a whole nother story, to follow up on the parable of the good soil. Blessed Pier Giorgio Frassati, despite the soil in which he was rooted, thrived. I mean, you could say he was in rocky soil with an agnostic family, even combative towards the faith. And yet he had an incredibly deep interior life. A lot of this was passed on from his grandmother, and it took root in his heart. And he continues to be an inspiration to this day, and I think worth unpacking. So,
yeah, absolutely. So it's really interesting. So he's born, 1901, and his parents, his dad was a senator. He was an ambassador for Germany. His mother was a painter, a pretty well-known painter. So they had
smoke cigars.
Yeah,
Ooh,
right.
I like that.
They had means, but yeah, mom I think was actually Catholic maybe, but definitely the dad was agnostic, and but then despite all that, he had this flow of grace that was given to him. But he lived his life. It was interesting when listening to his story. You have this moment where he's in college, he's studying to be this mining engineer. And but as he would write, I guess in his journal, like some of the challenges that surrounded him. He's got this to do, he's got that to do. But regardless of the pressures of school that he was under, he still found the adventure. Like he had a good balance in life, that he didn't get, like you're saying, like we have this idea of like, if we're going to be, a holy person, then we have to be always on our knees in prayer, closing the door, away from everybody, removed from the world. And there may be those who are called to that. For the most part, we're called to be in the world, not of the world, right? So that means we have to engage. But he had that interior life, that interior peace, that interior gaze with the Lord that gave him the grace and the awareness of the beauty around him to go and take on the adventure, to climb the heights. And but at the same time, to see the poor. And that was one of his great loves, was to serve the poor because of the great love that Christ was dwelling in him. This episode is brought to you by Covenant Eyes. Sign up for free 30 days of Covenant Eyes today. Go to covenanteyes.com and enter the promo code POINTMAN. Get started today. There is an absolute, and a war being waged right now against us and against our family. Listen to these statistics. 56% of divorces list pornography as one of the major factors leading to divorce. 56%. 60% of men in a survey said watching pornography decreased their desire to read or study God's word. C.S. Lewis said, what we practice, not what we preach, is usually our greatest contribution to conversations to others? What example are you setting for your family and community with your online behavior? If you're not personally struggling with porn, are you doing all you can to defend your family from the enemy? This is an attack that we need to guard our homes, to protect our families. Even if this is something that you're not struggling with, you still need, because we live in a pornographic culture, we need to guard our homes and guard our families. Lead the way for your wife and for your children by getting Covenant Eyes. Covenant Eyes is a software that is installed across all your devices, phones, laptops, desktops, iPads, all that, and monitors your online activity and reports. There's reports that go to an accountability partner. That's the other great part about Covenant Eyes. Covenant Eyes has also blocking technology that allows you to keep the pornography off your devices. This transparency in our online behaviors fosters integrity and deepens relationships. We can't fight this alone, and we need help. So you go online to Covenant Eyes. You actually, if you use the promo code POINTMAN, then you can get, I think, a 30-day free trial. So check out Covenant Eyes, put in POINTMAN, get your 30-day free trial today.
I love that comparison of mountaineering to his faith.
Yeah.
And he would use that comparison a lot. And, they said that he would give speeches and talks to his friends and peers and stuff like that, and would draw those comparisons from mountaineering to his faith, up to the heights.
Yes.
Yeah, kind of a weird thing. Growing up, I used to get these North Face catalogs and Patagonia catalogs, and I wanted to mountaineer growing up. That was like my thing. Yeah. And so my buddy and I would go backpacking, and I actually had the opportunity to spend 30 days mountaineering in the North Cascades, just south of Canada.
Wow.
Climbing glaciers, doing, crevasse rescue, the whole thing. It was really, really cool. And so I love Frassati. He's really an interesting guy. Again, going back to relatability. I think especially as we journey from boys to men, we need this adventure. We need to push ourselves. And there's just no better way to push yourself than in the limits, in the outdoors, in God's creation. And so I think he's really an inspiring guy.
Yeah. And I think relatable across socioeconomic boundaries, because to your point, Jason, he was born, yes, an agnostic, lukewarm family in terms of the faith, but a very affluent one. So his dad ran and owned La Stampa, which is still in existence today. This day, he was a senator, a well-known family. Again, very financially flexible, and at the same time, he had this great and deep love for the poor.
Yeah.
And there's two stories that I think are worth sharing here, because this just shows he just crossed all sorts of boundaries. The poor loved him. His friends, blue-collar workers at university, loved him. In the white-collar circles, they loved him. He was just a loved guy because he was just radiating Christ. And that's something, too, that I want to highlight is all these saints, regardless of their stories, there was a deep joy. And he certainly is worth highlighting there is his joy. But on one trip, his dad was also an ambassador to Germany. So this is after World War I, before World War II. So they're up in Berlin in wintertime, and they're at this embassy party. And his dad got him this incredibly nice coat to keep him warm. And so he's at this party. He's like, man, this is not my scene. So he exits stage left, puts his nice coat on, goes for a walk around Berlin, and he encounters this homeless man in the snow in the middle of Berlin winter. And without hesitating, he's like, hey, take my, let's call it a mink coat.
Right.
I know that's a lady's term, but I think this was mink. So he gives the man this incredibly nice coat and just keeps walking, and then meets back at the party. His dad's like, Pierre, where's your coat? I dropped a lot of money on that.
Yeah.
He's like, yeah. Kind of mumbled his way out of it. But his dad was furious.
Yeah.
But Pierre's like, I live in Italy. I'm only here for a little bit. I don't need this coat. But that's just how he operated. Well, you see that again when he goes to university. His parents get him a car, which is a big deal. This is the 20s.
Right.
Not everyone has a car. He sells the thing immediately, takes the cash, and just is like giving it to the poor, buying medicine for the poor, and he's running to school.
Yeah.
He's biking to school. And I just think that's awesome. Like, he was super athletic. He's like, why do I need a car?
Right.
Thanks, but I know what I'm going to do with this. I don't think like that.
Yeah, no,
You know,
it's crazy inspiring to hear that. Like he just, but again, it flows out of this relationship that he had with God, and that's the thing. Like when it comes to our identity of who we are, like the more that we are at peace and understand who we are and whose we are, like that gives us so much confidence in our step. Like when we're insecure, when we're trying to like measure up everybody and see where I line up with things. If we can keep our eyes and our measure on where the Lord is calling us to be and who we are and what the Lord is asking of us, there's a confidence in that I think there's a freedom in that that's attractive, that we see no matter what circle he ran in, he was secure in who he was because he knew whose he was.
Yeah, I think there's also, going back to this coach story, something that's convicting. So his dad, who's this agnostic, who's combative against the faith, he must have been moved at some point. I'm
Yeah.
sure Pierre told him what happened with the coat. A quick story: before we moved down to Louisiana, I had orders up in Maryland, and one weekend we went out to Baltimore, saw the aquarium, showed it to the kids, and after we had a little lunch. And this is a winter day in Baltimore. It's not Berlin, but it's cold. And there was this homeless lady, Penny. I still remember her. And my wife was like, "Hey, come in. We'll buy you a sandwich." So she sits down next to my son, my oldest, who doesn't know a stranger. He's like talking her ear off. He's like, "Dude, get over here. Like, you sit over here. I'll sit between." And he just thinks she's awesome.
Yeah.
And he's having a great conversation with Penny. And Penny is like skinny and she's shaking. My wife gets her lunch. I have like this awkward conversation with her because I'm uncomfortable. And then we leave, and my wife, without hesitating, I got her this really nice Healy Hansen jacket for her birthday. And she just like, "Oh, hey, Penny, take my jacket." And at one point I was like, "Wow, that's so beautiful." And at the same, my interior mood was like, I was angry. I was like, I that was a really expensive coat that I saved to get you for your birthday. And you just gave it to Penny. He was like, but I remember thinking like, "Oh, wow, like so beautiful."
Yeah.
I'm mad at your generosity.
But I'm mad at your generosity. Yeah. So this, like a Pier Giorgio figure, they're so convicting, so attractive, and at the same time head scratching. It's like, where's this coming from?
Go ahead.
I'll say I had a friend in college that would give all his money away when we would go out to bars at night, or and I would always get mad at him, like, "Dude, like, quit giving all your money away to all these people on the street," And he just couldn't help it. He loved doing it.
Yeah.
And his generosity would make me angry.
Right.
Dude, you're giving away all of our beer money. Like, stop doing that.
Well, I just find it so inspiring. Look, service is something I hope to aspire to one day. And it's so easy for me to say, well, it's not the right season of my life. We'll do that tomorrow. Well, here was a guy who died at 24 and had been serving for like 7 or 8 years, the poor. So just doing the math, he's 16, 17, actively caring and serving and loving others. And it's very inspiring for me personally.
There's such a detachment and you have to see in his heart that he didn't hold on to that coat because it will look good and it would make me look good in front of others. And it was, he just detaches himself from the worldly things and sees more importantly the heart of others, and he wants to serve. It's such an inspiring story. We're giving without measure. And, we haven't gotten there yet, but so he contracts polio because of his service to the poor. And within like 5 or 6 days, he dies. Right. And so when he dies, at his funeral, it wasn't like the people from his dad's circle of friends, from the politicians or the political leaders. It wasn't, the art community came together because of the mom and surrounded. The thousands of people came out. It was this huge event, and it was primarily people, the poor. The poor knew him. They called him a saint, and they called him his friend. Like it was amazing to see that's his heart, being able to see others, being able to be present to others, being able to serve others. Again, the perspective, like we talked about the Ulma family, of like, well, if they would have not have given their self, like if they would have been like, you know what, we'll help the Jews, but we're not going to bring them into our home. That's going to hurt too much. That would be too much. They'd be too dangerous for us. if you just said the same thing for Pierre, if he would have not, well, it'd have been, if you go out to the poor, it's gonna be a little dangerous. You give yourself and you could get sick. You give away all your
Mhm.
riches, then who are you going to give to then? If you don't have anything, how can you give if you don't have anything? And all those excuses that maybe that could come in through your mind, he just doesn't care about those details and focuses on what most important, which is love.
Yeah. And he's a practical guy. It's not like he's got his head in the clouds. I mean,
Yeah.
he understands the worth of beer money, but he's out there and he's like, and it's not like a one-time encounter with the poor. This is a guy that is finding time for his studies. He's a dedicated student, finding time to have fun with his buddies. I mean, they called their crew the mischievous ones.
Yeah.
He was getting in fist fights with fascists, at the time, because they were trying to take root in Italy. And there's a couple occasions where you're like, wait, he's a blessed and he's getting in fist fights. That's also part of, I love that, because that is, he's hitting on every facet of a man's engine.
Yeah.
It's adventure, fighting, sports, service, studies.
Yeah.
And at the same time, he knows how to carry himself as a gentleman in these elite circles. And then he also knows how to relate in these homeless camps. And everyone loves this guy. And not that he's seeking their love. He's seeking to love them.
That's right.
And he's just getting rid of this. He's like, his humility is so great. It's like, he's not thinking about himself.
And to your point of humility, I mean, so the poor came out, they didn't even know who his family was,
Right.
who his dad was.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, that's just amazing. You come from this very well-to-do family. You're giving away your car, and no one even knows who you are.
Yeah.
It's a very high bar. It's certainly encouraging and challenging.
Yeah.
Yeah, he wasn't doing it for himself. He wasn't doing it for some kind of an award that he was going to win in the community. He wasn't putting on airs, and he wasn't wearing masks. Like he was genuine. He was real. And again, that's the I think for me, what I'm so encouraged by is that just to truly first dive deep into our relationship with God, and then let that love pour out without holding anything back, to be free to give yourself, like the story of the rich young man in the scriptures, where he's doing all these things, but there's something he's lacking. He's not giving it all away like the Lord's calling him to. And Pier Giorgio, I feel like he entered into life, whether he was at school, whether he was at study, whether he was out and about in the world, he lived life to the full, because he was free, because he was in that deep relationship with that freedom in Christ.
Well, I love what you're hitting on, Sam, because we're not called to be doormats. We're called to live life to the fullest, and he's the perfect example of that. And when I was studying his story, I wasn't fully putting that all together. And so I was wondering a little bit like what we were going to talk about today. But because there wasn't a tragedy, so to speak, involved, and his story is just amazing. Mm-hmm. That he recognized that. He lived life to the fullest. And I think that's a great example for us, for our listener. We're not called to be doormats. We are called to live our life to the fullest and live adventurous lives, and get out there and do it.
Yeah. I think that's a great point. And I was recently, when I told you guys I went up to North Carolina to this camp with my boys, I had this sidebar conversation with one of the counselors up there who's got this wanderlust for just travel. So he basically takes his money, and the big thing now is a lot of these camp counselors Southeast Asia. That's a big travel spot, just because it's different than Europe. It's not as tame. And so we were having this conversation. I said, man, I love to travel too. But I'll tell you what, having a family at this stage in my life is way more adventurous. Yeah. Like I would rather be at home at the dinner table, engaging my family, than in Southeast Asia. Mm-hmm. And I know that might be hard for him in his 20s to conceive, because it certainly would be for me, because I had wanderlust. I want to travel and see everything, and did a lot of traveling. But that to your point of like living life to your fullest is like being fully present, fully engaged. That is a challenge now. Like that's like scaling the heights to use Frassati's terms. And I think that whole spectrum of man, like you need to have that fully alive heart as a boy in your teenage years, but but it looks different now. And in this stage of my life, it's like fully alive is like, how am I being present? How am I serving those in front of me? Because he was a single guy, like, and he was definitely fully alive at that point in his life. But then what does it look like now as a married man,
Yeah, it's the balance in life. That's why I feel like he was so strong at. Like, he was studies, but he was still able to be adventurous, but he was still able to like not get caught up in his adventures so much that he was wasting all of his money on travel. He was going out to the poor and to the service of others. And then at the same time, he was finding time to make sure that he was in that relationship in prayer and Eucharistic adoration, going to daily mass. Like and so it was just this great example of being able to discern our steps, but being able to live to the full of where the Lord's calling us to be in our space, and not getting too caught up in one spot where we neglect the others.
That's such a great point. His interior life from the outside seems very strong, through adoration, through prayer, through daily communion, which I don't think was a very common thing back then. And again, wow, I just it's so inspiring. We in South Louisiana, we love to hunt and fish. We love to be outside. We love to go to the mountains, and those things are all great, and they all are part of God's creation. But we've got to have that balance, because that's where our strength comes from. That's where our discernment comes from, and our joy comes from.
Yeah, and you could tell. I mean, he did have balance. At some point, I wonder, when did the guy sleep? Because studying up on him, it shows that he's having these nighttime vigils and adoration. He's going to his studies. From there, he's pulling some pranks with his buddies. He's climbing mountains, helping the poor. It's like, man, when do you just take a breath?
I know that the all-nighter, like I heard, one of the stories was that, that mom and dad was looking for him, and he was in adoration the whole night. He spent the entire night in adoration, and the parents were like, is he out like drinking with his buddies like to the end of the night? Like, where is he at? And then they were concerned, like they went to the pastor, I think, and it was like, so, hey, my son's doing this. Is this okay? And the pastor's like, he's adoring the Lord. That's totally good.
It's acceptable.
Right.
Yeah.
And they didn't even know that he had this devotion or was serving the poor until his death, which is wild to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. The parents were like, who are all these people? Where did they come from? How did this happen?
Yeah.
Had no idea what that interior, like the life of Saint Joseph, right? This quiet life in service to the Lord. And we, it's powerful.
Yep.
But I think, Sam, kind of something you hit on was, when did this guy sleep? Again, it's just the power of being intentional, and it just, what he didn't have was 2 hours of Netflix every night.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
He wasn't spending 3 hours on his social media account.
Yeah.
And how powerful it is when you are in alignment with God's will, when you know what you're here to do, get out of the way. Because you can
you're not
really
wasting your energy on things that have no meaning.
It was like a pipe, and there was no holes in the pipe. That energy and all that water was flowing in one direction.
That's a great analogy.
That's a really great analogy.
And it's inspiring for me.
Yeah. There's no dissipated energy. It's all focused.
Yep.
It's a really good point.
That'd be a tough thing to do right now. Pull up your phone and just look at how many hours in the past week you spent on your phone.
It's 1 hour and 58 minutes was last week per day for me.
Yeah.
Some of that's work email. Okay.
Yeah,
it's terrible. I hate that. I hate that
mean.
Alert every Sunday. I'm like, ew.
I wanted to highlight his calling to service.
Yeah.
I think for a lot of men in our culture and society, we're eager to want to serve, and so that's something that comes naturally in men. We're talking about like the Cajun Navy when a hurricane comes around, and that's just a really fascinating topic for me, that he was just called to being at the service of others. I think that's really awesome, especially for a young man. You don't particularly see that, although I do think most people are very eager to serve. I just think that's an amazing quality.
Yeah. I think now we almost feel like we have to ask permission, or that we have to be part of some program to help or to serve. He's like, I don't need to ask you permission. I'm just going to go there and what do you need?
Yeah. It just flowed out of him.
Yeah.
That's a good point. He wasn't a part of some organization.
Yeah.
Maybe he was. I think he was like
he was a third order Dominican, but he wasn't part of any programs helping with the poor. He just kind of did that on his own initiative.
Yeah.
Well, I'd love to serve with you more, Clint. I'd love to, because I do think it's really important. And
I mean,
like to do that
nothing
more.
feels better than going to help somebody or do something that is of service. And it's just when you leave, the feeling that you have is that you've helped somebody is amazing.
Yeah, that's a great point. So like maybe finding out from your parish, from the diocese, and say what's out there right now, Catholic Charities, what are things going on that I can get involved with, that I can bring my kids in, or I can bring my family in, kind of a thing, to kind of be aware of those things. Because right, when the hurricane comes, when the destruction in some country happens, and the appeal goes out, we respond. I feel like we people know, people hear it, and people do something, right? But then before it makes the news, or before it's the big trending thing on the social media, like we need to find out what's going on around us, and not wait for the organized program before we start doing something, to find out. Like it's like the passage where there was, again, the rich man with Lazarus at his doorstep. And so if Lazarus is at his doorstep, and he goes to judgment, basically, and he's put before this big chasm, and he's there, and he says to Father Abraham, he says, tell Lazarus to dip his finger into the pool. So he knows his name. Like the rich man knew Lazarus, who was at his doorstep, but he did nothing. And that's the thing it's kind of haunting. But at the same time, is that like, who is at our doorstep? Like, that's another thing you take to prayer. Like, Lord, who are you calling me to serve today? Who is the poor? Maybe not the financial poor that maybe that I don't see as much, or maybe you do, and maybe that's the person. But maybe there's somebody in the family, there's a friend that's at the doorstep. It's not in some other country. It's not in some other place or some tragic moment that's going on right now. But who is the Lord calling us to serve? And we've got to take that into action. The Lord calls us, the two greatest commandments is to love God with all your heart, all your mind, all your strength, and all your soul. And the second is like it, is to love your neighbor as yourself. But the Lord will say, love others as I love you. Like, so, if we say we love God, but we hate our neighbor, our religion's in vain.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, I don't want to rationalize not serving, but I would suspect at this juncture in our lives that we should probably look to serve our children first, almost, right? Because you're like, to your point, I think in our last podcast, you're like, most dads, you're saying, are annoyed or irritated or detached or not engaged. Just saying, hey, you want to go play baseball out front? I mean, that is service. That'll like awaken your child. Like, oh, you actually want to talk to me. You want to engage me. Versus like, I got to go help the poor, but you just got home from work. No, I'm on my path to sanctity.
It reminds me of the story of who was the professor at Boston College, Peter Crave, and he was being interviewed. I don't know if I shared this story before, but he was sitting down this interview, and the guy asked him, what's your favorite book? Because he's written all these amazing books, really awesome books in the faith. And he says the book that that was one of his favorites. And then he said, the next question was, which one of your books you think is God's favorite? And then he stops and he says, probably the one that I didn't write, so that I could spend more time with my wife and kids. And that's, to your point, like that's got to be something that we cannot neglect, is that sometimes we can get so caught up in trying to go out there. Who's out there? Again, Lazarus, maybe at the doorstep, but maybe Lazarus is in your house. Maybe he's your son or your daughter, or maybe your spouse, or maybe you're butting heads, and you're not finding that easy way to hanging out like you used to. It's a little harder. So you go to what's easier. Maybe it's others, where the Lord is calling you to come back home and really engage in those relationships. It's hard.
So what Blessed Pier Giorgio Frassati, modeled really well in his life was his interior life.
Yeah.
The reason he was so, Drew's favorite word, efficacious, so fruitful, so impactful in his life, was because of his prayer life. The reason he was able to minister so well is because that first came from a prayer life. And so I think from the prayer life, then all this makes sense. Otherwise, we're just a glorified social worker trying to like, oh, I got to help this person, got to help this person. You're drained of energy. The reason he had so much energy, and he was still literally climbing mountains and doing well in school and going to these social circles and serving the poor, was because of his prayer life. I think that needs to be highlighted front and center. And it also shows his magnetic personality. He's coming back from this trip, and there's accounts where total strangers on this trolley in Turin, Italy, where he lives, and he's like, all right, guys, let's start the rosary. And everyone starts. They're like, I don't even know if everyone there even like has a rosary or wants to pray the rosary, knows how to pray the rosary, there's like, all right, this guy is a leader,
Yeah.
you know? So he seems like he knows what he's talking about. Let's do it. You know, and they still all pray the rosary with him.
It's like sometimes we're having a hard time. Like, should I ask this for my family to pray the rosary? Like, they're going to give me the looks. Like, and this guy is straight up like,
Yeah.
I don't care.
on the trolley, like
Yeah.
to the strangers. Hey guys, we're praying the rosary.
Hey guys,
Right,
listen
like
up.
in the New York subway.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Right.
Like, could you imagine doing that in an airplane? Like, maybe if the airplane was going down, you'd be like, okay, guys, we're going to start the rosary. And they're like, okay,
Yeah.
that's a good idea.
Yeah, that's a good, right.
And not wait for the plane to be going down and have that boldness and faith. The
Yeah.
Lord's calling you to it.
And I think also just to clarify the point about fighting, the times when he got into fist fights was always out of defense. So the first one was for his family. The other one was he was protesting fascism in the streets and got mobbed. And there was like some university students and girls. And he basically took the banner and started using it like he's just
Defense.
crushing dudes.
Yeah.
He got arrested, which is also cool, you know? And then he also was smart enough to leverage and say, hey, my dad's a senator. They're like, all right, get out of here, kid. So he knew how to operate in the
Total
world.
package.
Yeah, total package. Yeah. That's Pierre.
Yeah. This was a lot of fun. So a couple tactics and takeaways. We can kind of bring it on home. Sam, you started us off. You got any things you want to start us off with on this one?
Yeah, before the show, Jason had highlighted that, you know, I guess Bishop Barron had mentioned Pier Giorgio Frassati is a lot like Saint Therese of Lisieux in that they both died when they're 24. Quick highlight: Pier Giorgio's feast day is July 4th, so you know Americans should love him.
Yeah.
I know I do. And you know, again, this hidden life, but they had this deep interior life, which I think the Lord is now showing over time. Like, hey, this is what happens when you follow me with your whole heart, soul, mind, and strength. Like he loves, he loves us dearly, but he also wants to show, I want a relationship with you. And Pier Giorgio entered into that relationship, and then his life just went nuclear.
I think one of my favorite things about Pierre was it's kind of a head fake. You kind of get sucked in by, the mountaineering. Oh, he
Mhm.
was a young guy. And then it all kind of points back to Christ and this
Yes.
prayer life.
Yeah.
And that's what's so cool to me is there's some external accolades that are interesting, but what is it all channeling from? And that's what inspires me. And that's what I need to continue to improve upon. You know, how do I improve that prayer life through contemplative prayer, meditative prayer, adoration, and see if I can become efficacious, whatever that
There we
word
go. Yeah.
means.
Yeah.
Nothing to add for me. You said it perfectly.
You know, the glory of God is man fully alive. And I feel like that's Blessed Giorgio Frassati. Like, he was somebody who was able to climb the heights physically too, spiritually. And from that perspective, you can see the big picture. And he never kept his eyes off that big picture when he was, so that he didn't get caught up in those little details that would have prevented him from, like, well, if I go too close to the poor, I could get sick and then I won't be able to serve more. So I'm going to pull back. He kept going all in with that balance in life for his love for God, never abandoning that love first, so that he could have the power to go out there and be such a great example and witness for people in Turin, but people here now today.
You know, I don't understand polio, I guess, at all. I didn't realize that it was that,
Supposedly this was like an
quick.
aggressive strand of it. It's not like, I guess there's different strands, but the one that he had was so aggressive that within 5 to 6 days from contracting it from the poor, from his service out there, that's how he died.
Man, that's unbelievable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it's crazy too that we're talking about some of the odd things of the world, that his body was incorrupt. Right?
Oh, we forgot about that topic.
Yeah, we have to talk about
Here's Clinton opening up a can of worms.
Yeah.
Golly, I thought we
Gotta
were
talk
landing the
about it.
plane.
Yeah.
Yeah, so as a convert to the Catholic Church, this was a very new and still a very strange topic to me. Incorruptible bodies. I mean, it's in the Bible, ashes to ashes, dust to dust.
Yes.
And so we're saying that some people never go to ashes. And then you're like, oh no, you can actually go. A lot of these bodies are in Europe, and you can see these people who are hundreds of years old still preserved.
Hundreds of years dead.
Hundreds of years dead.
Right.
So if anybody can shed any light here, I'm all ears, because this is very fascinating and strange.
Yeah, well, let's save that for a topic for another day. Let's do that.
Okay.
That's awesome.
Okay. We're gonna leave the audience and me hanging.
A little
bit.
cliffhanger.
Yeah.
See what I did there?
Yeah, is that a hyphen
It's
word?
a bad joke.
Yeah.
Sorry.
All right. Well, y'all, thanks for joining us. One of my favorite shows so far. Hope you enjoyed it. Have a great day. Man, what another great show today. I want to thank all of our listeners for spending the time with us. I want to challenge you, if you've enjoyed this, please share this show with another husband or father that you know, or leave us a review on Google, Apple, or Spotify. We'll see you next time.
I was born a fighter. I rise up like smoke from a gun, like a brand new sun.